You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, today's topic is kind of an existential one because we're talking about, basically, to paraphrase, I think it was Bruce Springsteen, where the topic for today is training. What is it good for? And the topic came up. Came up because we were talking with Andreas recently, and we were talking about customer guarantees with Andreas. And as we were talking about customer guarantees, we started wondering, well, what can we guarantee as when we're training? And that's how this topic came up is training. Does it bring any benefit to anyone?
Yes.
So that's what we're going to weigh in on today. So I kind of have my opinions on the subject and you have your opinions on the subject. Where should we start?
Let me start hearing you and then I'll jump in.
Okay. My opinion, remember how Andres had a great phrase. He had borrowed it from somebody. He said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, something like that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think it's an old Buddhist proverb.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to make the distinction between training that works and training that doesn't. Because a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of whether the training works or not depends on, does the student want to learn the skill or does the student just want to have the dream of learning this skill? And I started to come to this opinion. Yeah, I started to come to this opinion because my wife is an English teacher and she has students who actually want to do the work of learning English. And then she has other students who don't really want to do the work of learning English. They just want to be able to say that they learn English. They want to say that they're studying English. And the first group, the one that, is actually there to learn English, tends to have great results. And the second group, the one that has the dream of learning English, they tend to not have any results at all. And so that's how I've come to this opinion. It reminds me a little bit of a professional basketball player. You take a professional basketball player and the rest of us who are not professional basketball players, we imagine the glamorous life of a professional basketball player. And if we think of, heavy gold chains and loud, fancy parties at big mansions in the Hollywood Hills and, scantily clad women at the pool party and stuff like that. And we think, oh, wow, the life of a professional basketball player is really glamorous and fun. But the thing is, the reality, the behind the scenes reality that's not nearly as fun to look at is that the life of a professional basketball player or any high level athlete is actually extremely boring and repetitive. I mean, a professional basketball player spends hours every day practicing free throws. It's like one of the most boring activities in all of basketball is the free throw. And they practice that for hours. And then, just something as simple as dribbling the ball. They'll practice dribbling the ball between their legs for hours. Dribble, 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 over, and then dribble, 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 and dribble, 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 over and over again for hours. And then they'll practice one small move over and over and over. They'll spend hours every day practicing it. And then they'll go to bed early and they'll get up early the next morning and they'll do the same thing. And this is the reality of life as a professional basketball player or a pro in pretty much anything. Whereas the image that the rest of us have is limousines and fancy parties and, pool parties in the Hollywood Hills.
Heavy gold. Let's not forget
chains.
that.
Yeah. Heavy gold chains and stuff like that. That's the image, but that's not the reality at all. So if you want to be a professional basketball player, you need to love basketball enough so that you can put in those hours of boring and repetitive practice. Training is a lot the same way. If you really want to learn the skill, you need to put in the hours and hours of boring practice. And if you don't, then training is just, a fun diversion where you get away from your desk and maybe eat a bag lunch that was brought in by a caterer. And that's all training is. And then when the training is over, you forget everything and you go back to exactly the way you were. So, but for those people, they already have what they want. What they want is the dream of, in this case, the dream of giving great presentations. They already have that dream. Dreams are free. Anyone can have them. The people who training is good for are the ones who are they want the skill so badly that they put in the boring hours of practice. That's my take on it. So training is great for some people, and it's a complete waste of time for other people. What's your take on it?
Well, my take is pretty much in parallel with the scenarios that you mentioned. And when I think about it, I think I would say there are three prerequisites for the training to be effective or even worth it. I mean, unless these three prerequisites are in place, I would encourage anyone not to spend any money or set aside any time for any training engagement. And the first one would be the one that you mentioned. I mean, when someone wants to get, in terms of skill set, let's say from point A to point B, but currently they lack the necessary skill set. So they know what they lack and they want to acquire that. So that's in line with what you said. They need to want it. But I will go one step further as a second item. And this is in line with what you said. Everybody wants to get better at presentations. Well, not everybody, and I have seen them firsthand in some of my trainings, but let's stay with the ones that they say they want. I think there's a sometimes very clear, but sometimes pretty unclear distinction between wanting to get better and having the internal conviction, internal validation to actually get better. I want a lot of things, but for many of those things, I'm not willing to put in the necessary effort, which is actually the third item that I was thinking of. And when this person actually prioritizes time, resources, money and other efforts to acquire these necessary skill sets to help them get from point A to point B. So to me, there is a distinction between wanting to get better and having the internal validation to get better. And one clear sign of that, I think, would be, are you prioritizing this in your life? Are you putting the time? Are you putting the money? Are you putting the effort to actually achieve this? Otherwise, I mean, there are so many courses, for example, training courses that I purchased online, and they're just sitting in some library on some online training platform. Some of them I did on the first couple of days and finished. Some of them I said, I'll do this soon, but that soon was like 7 years ago. So sure. Obviously, I didn't have the same internal conviction and priority for all those training topics. So I'm in line with what you shared, and I will just take it one step further to say there's a second level of personal engagement, which is determined by, I believe, your inner. I mean, you know it in your gut. Do you have that conviction or not? If you have, nothing can stop you. And if you don't, I don't think even if came the best trainers in the world, that would be a huge waste of time and money. And I think you should stay away from that, both as a person and as a company.
That's a good point. So on our next episode, so we're going to bring in the outside perspective of Andreas. And another thing that I want to hear more about, you mentioned this phrase, internal validation. And I want to hear a little bit more about that, because this is a new phrase that I've heard. So I want to hear a little bit more about what you mean by that. And somebody who has the internal validation, what are the signs that somebody has the internal validation? So for me as a trainer, when I'm looking at somebody, when I'm looking at one of the students in a training session, are there outward signs that I can see that show that, yes, this person has the internal validation, but that person does not? So we don't have time to go into that today, but when we, on our next episode, I want to hear you describe that a little bit. Is that cool?
Yeah, of course. I think there are clear signs and then there are subtle signs. So we can dig into those in the next episode.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Alper. And I'll talk to you at the next
Thank you.
episode. All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.